So welcome to another edition of the Brazilian Shirt Name podcast. The Legendino is in Rio. Legendino, we are on a mission from God today. See, I went and saw the Penguin and she said, get the band together again. Get the band back together again. What's the matter with you? So that's what we've had to do today. The original Three Musketeers, I would like to say. A drum roll, indeed. Yeah, the DJ's here. He's not D'Artagnan, by the way, but he is the one and only Andy Brassell, a.k.a. the Top Brass. Hey, good to see you.
Oh, thanks for having me, fellas. This is nice.
Yeah, it's like the old days, isn't it? It's like the old days.
Yeah, I think we're a bit further than 106 miles from Chicago, I think.
I like that. I do like that. So he's got the first free kick into the action straight away. As you all know, on the Brazilian Shirt Name podcast, we always look at a sometimes iconic, but often memorable game from sometime in the football past firmament. And Andy, it's been your task to choose a game today. You're taking us back to 2009, a year that I can barely remember, actually.
I think it will cover all our individual and collective bases. So 2009, when the three of us would have been on the World Football Phone-In together, it was the UEFA Cup final on the 20th of May at the Sucre Saracoğlu in Istanbul between Shakhtar Donetsk and Werder Bremen.
And there is a reason. Well done in choosing this one. I didn't realize till I got into your book, which you've just published, We Play On, which is the story of Shakhtar Donetsk, I suppose, pre, but also particularly post all the annexation of Crimea and the war in Ukraine. And, well, what a story they've got to tell. But, Tim, the reason why I suddenly remembered 2009 as I read Andy's book was because I remember talking to you and Andy several times about this team in Ukraine that was essentially a Brazilian team in Ukraine, and the number of Brazilians that went over there, it was a phenomenon, wasn't it?
Well, it's a hybrid, isn't it? There's most of the attacking unit is Brazilian, and you've got locals forming the defensive unit, and a Romanian coach who made a point of learning Portuguese in order to facilitate. Andy, how did they make this work? Because you could see the potential for this being divisive, and yet it obviously worked.
Yeah, and I think most people, Tim, look at, as you say, Michel Luchescu, the coach, already a Portuguese speaker from pre-1970 World Cup. Actually, he fell in love with the country when he was touring with Romania, and in a warm-up for Mexico 70, and a tournament in which he took quite a lot of ideas from Brazilian football, and he fell in love with the game in Brazil, as he put it to me. And so this is something that has been germinating in his mind for a long time. By the time we get to the mid 2000s, where he starts getting this project together. But even though everyone looks at Luchescu and thinks of his communication skills, his desire for how the game should be played as he sees it, that desire actually comes from higher up. He was picked to do this job by the president, Rinat Akhmetov, because he wants to play beautiful football. He wants to play football that Ukrainian teams never played before. Now, if we're talking about football philosophy, Ukrainian football is really replete with meaning, because you go back into the Soviet days and you go back and you see Valery Lobanovsky, the outstanding coach, perhaps, of the Soviet era, well, undoubtedly the outstanding coach of the Soviet era, and a coach that, with his dynamic of and his approach with them, a very, very scientific philosophy, a sort of, I guess, Ukrainian twist on total football with a bit of hard maths and stats thrown in there as well. That has already defined Ukrainian football, and that allowed Ukrainian football to create its own space in the Soviet Union, because Dynamo Kiev frequently won league titles and in the Soviet top league, and also managed to win a European trophy, become the only Ukrainian team to win a European trophy before Shakhtar at this point, and frequently beat Moscow's top clubs, which was no easy thing. So when Akhmetov set out to build Shakhtar into a club and a team that could frequently challenge Dynamo, which seemed impossible to a lot of people because they were just a provincial club way out east, he wanted to put philosophy front and center. And it's for that reason that he chose Lucescu. And they used to have these long chats when Lucescu first became coach there, in the stadium, they in the old stadium, the Olimpiski in Donetsk, that they would sit around for hours after the game, like having drinks, doing karaoke, chatting about their vision of future football and all this sort of stuff. And between them, they came up with this pact and this plan on how they were going to do it. And this is probably not even the ultimate manifestation, 2009, of what they wanted to do. So the team is a lot more Brazilian by then. And yes, that idea that you have of like Ukrainian defense and Brazilian attack, broadly speaking, is there. But it's funny. I think you look down this starting 11 for the game in Istanbul, and you think, only 5 Brazilian starters.
But Fernandinho certainly was key, wasn't he, in putting all the elements together, or at least holding all the elements together.
Although this one is not his finest hour, is it? I mean, it's the goal that they concede is, well, partly it's the goalkeeper from making a mistake from a free kick, but the conceding of the free kick is just all about Fernandinho getting it wrong. I remember when he joined City, this was the main moment that gave me doubts about him. And I proved to be totally wrong on this, you know, although many Brazil supporters would disagree. You know, he doesn't come out of the World Cup. In fact, when he took so much stick after a second World Cup didn't go his way that he didn't want to play for the national team anymore, and he had to be coaxed back to come back for a Copa America. But the goal that Bremen score that brings them back into the game is all about Fernandinho's errors, isn't it? Playing a terrible ball, straight line out of defence where the fella receiving it has no panorama and can't keep control of the ball, and then conceding a foul on the edge of the box. So it's not Fernandinho's finest moment, although the body of work that he left there was obviously key to the entire project. Is he the link man between the Ukrainian defensive unit and the Brazilian attackers?
100% Tim, and not just in terms of what he is on the pitch, but what he is off the pitch. The respect that everyone at Shakhtar still has for him on a human level is huge. He was the one who learned how to speak Russian before everyone else to communicate locally, and he made that link between management and team. A couple of people have said to me he's kind of like the dad of the dressing room, really. But again, it's not the ultimate manifestation of Fernandinho at this point. As you say, he goes on to become one of the best midfielders in the European game at Manchester City, in carving out a very particular role, almost in the Makelele role, if you like. Whereas that wasn't the case with Shakhtar. He was a little bit more off the leash. Now, partly that's because of the quality of the Ukrainian Premier League. Partly that's because of the way Shakhtar play, which is breaks off all the time, no breaks in actual facts, piling downhill. They're kind of like a basketball team in that sense, really. But in the way that he develops, it reminds me of, I suppose, what maybe say Bruno Guimaraes, another player that you've had a few doubts about, but it's conquered a lot of hearts already in the English game. Maybe a template for where he could go, because I hear people say to me at Newcastle all the time, "Oh, Bruno's so brilliant on the ball. Now we've got Sandro Tonali. Maybe that can free him up to play number 8 and pile forward." And you're like, no. Like in a team that's going in the direction that Newcastle want to go, and if everything goes right for them, he will be the piano carrier in a year and a half's time. That is the ideal. And that's sort of what Fernandinho grew into because he had so many phenomenal players around him.
Whoa. Let's rewind to 2009 and we'll come back to 2023 shortly. But 2009, important, I mean, hugely important. Shakhtar Donetsk, as you've already said, coming from Ukraine, not a huge team in Ukraine, only won the championship there once before and are about to dominate, certainly a part of European football, and to everybody's surprise. This is, as I say, before the whole thing starts to fall apart in geopolitical terms, which we'll get to, and which you display very eloquently in your book. It's a proper book, Andy. I'll have to
thank you.
give you that. No, a proper book. And I could see it in so many ways. I could see it as a Hollywood movie, actually, you know, or a series, certainly a documentary series easily, but I could see it dramatically as a Hollywood movie because it has that spirit of the underdog triumphing, despite all the other issues around it. But in 2009, those issues aren't there. We've brought in the Brazilians. How do they then get to win the European Cup? We're talking about the final, but how did they get there? Sorry, European Cup, UEFA Cup. Forgive me.
Yeah, well, I think the key point, really, in terms of the route to the final, and they beat other teams on the way there. They beat Tottenham on the way there, for example. The main point is where they rolled Dynamo Kiev in the semi-final. That is absolutely huge, and it's a narrative that just captures the hearts and minds of Ukraine. Now, this isn't a point where Shakhtar quite capture the hearts and minds of Ukraine, but it is the moment where they say we're serious and we're here to stay. So it's a cagey first leg in Kiev, and for the second one, the return at the Olimpiski, it's packed out, and something is already happening at Shakhtar at the time. They're building the new stadium, the Donbass Arena, opposite, and the Olimpiski's old, very much a Soviet relic, not really fit for purpose. But that night, it's ice and fire. It's full of just orange flags waving everywhere, and Shakhtar take the early lead. They're then pegged back.
Sorry, do you mind telling people the significance of the Orange Revolution there?
Well, that's before we get to that, really. Sorry, that's past that. But these are just the colours of Shakhtar at this point. So it's not entirely connected in any way, shape, or form. So in fact, at this time, the reason that the Shakhtar are struggling to capture the hearts of a lot of Ukraine is because there are some Ukrainians who see them as Russian. And so that is why when, for example, war breaks out in Donbass in 2014, that a lot of Ukrainians, when Shakhtar and their players and their staff all leave the place, I mean, their captain, Taras Stepanenko, the captain now, Taras Stepanenko, says he was asked a lot in the first couple of years, why didn't you come over? Why did you come over here? Why did you leave? What's the problem? And he's obviously thinking, well, because there's a war. There's a war. We had to leave. But you know, some Ukrainians saw it as Russians going into Russia, which is not correct at all. So you know, I think they thought, you know, that they had a different perspective on the Orange Revolution that wasn't quite the case. But these are just the colours of the club. Anyway, back to the semi-final. And it's a huge moment for everyone at club. Dinamo have a really good team at the time as well. It's very close, but it takes that bit of Brazilian magic, that bit of Brazilian audacity, I suppose, in the winner, which is just a beautifully crafted goal. I think Ilsinho's goal is one of the most winning goal in that semi-final second leg, is one of the most iconic goals in the history of Shakhtar. It gets it up in a position where a goal really can't be scored. and he dribbles himself into a position where half a chance is possible, and then manages to take that chance, and that changes everything. They're making a statement, and by getting to the final and putting themselves in a position to win it, they can equal Dinamo in a way that they've always dreamed of doing. And it was just a dream. Like the idea of getting to a European final and winning a European trophy, like Dinamo had all those years before.
How did you get on board this train when you're too young for the clash the first time around? You know?
Don't remind me.
Maybe I want to see the
Well,
wheat fields over Kiev and down to the sea. You know, so what was your point of noticing this story and getting interested in it?
I would have put that a different way. Forgive me, Andy. I'd have put that a different way. I would have put it like, how did you get into this when you were too young to see me play support to the Clash
Obviously,
when Joe Strummer put me on the stage? But hey, listen, answer it any way you want.
Yeah, that is the correct way to frame it, of course,
Exactly.
Scott. Well, you didn't invite me for a start. None of this rubbish about not being born or whatever. I think I saw Shakhtar quite a lot around 2007, 2008, when I was covering Champions League, mainly in Portugal. And they're an easy team to connect with because they had all those Brazilian players. So I could speak their language. Not quite as well as I do now, but I could speak their language at least a bit. So I could communicate with those players after games and stuff, which was really helpful. And also, their football was just mesmerizing. I say in the book, you have like a first time you see Shakhtar in that period, and it's like, you know, when the late Sir Bobby Robson talked about Hungary in 1953 at Wembley being like men from Mars. I think a lot of people felt that about Shakhtar when they saw them the first time. You know, the dedication, the insistence with which they circulate the ball, it's astonishing. And they were kind of like a really good five-a-side team expanded into an 11-a-side format. Like some of the goals they score, just that little extra pass just because they can. It was an incredible collective effort. I mean, I think the second chapter in the book is called The Barcelona of the East. And, you know, there's a lot of connections between them as I talk about in the book. But yeah, it's something that definitely stayed with me. And then about a year after they had to move out of, so I always followed their story from them, but about a year after they had to move out of the Donbass, so 2015 that would have been, I was commissioned to do a film for The Guardian on what it was like being, you know, the biggest homeless football club in the world, essentially. And yeah, kept in touch with them from there. And that's where I was approached to do the book, and eventually got around to doing it, because obviously, sadly, it's a much bigger story than it ever was in the last year and a half.
Well, yeah, and they are still homeless, obviously. They went, and this is where we go beyond 2009, because you win the UEFA Cup and it doesn't stand for anything if your country's invaded. Does it? I think there was one.
Or does it? Or does it stand for more?
Well, this is the thing.
Suppose.
This is exactly the thing, because there's one passage in the book where you say, I think you're quoting, if not the coach, one of the directors of the club. In fact, it's in the intro, and he says that I've just won this, but you know, this should have been in 2013, I suppose, 2013, 2014. They just had a good season, or they just won something. And he said, no, what does it all mean, essentially, when your country has been invaded? And I wonder whether, well, that is clearly the thrust of their story since winning the UEFA Cup. Would you not agree?
Yeah, well, I guess at first, as you say, it's just surviving. You know, there are things in life that are far more important than football. We know that, of course. But I think this club that's used to winning everything, that's used to having everything their own way, that's developing an international name, finally is just suddenly turfed from its home stadium, an incredible stadium, Donbass Arena, is turfed out from its city, its region, into this part of Ukraine that just doesn't really have much time for them or taste for them at all, and it has a very negative image of them. The first couple of years are super hard. So when they come back and start winning stuff again, it means more. It means more that they're able to do it. Now, it's not Lucescu who's able to do that, despite the fact he's given so much to the club. It's Paulo Fonseca, who's at Lille now, of course, and was at Roma before, almost become Tottenham manager a couple of times, etc., etc., etc. And for them to not just exist, but continue to win. You know, you look at the numbers. Since they left in 2014, they've that fallow first couple of years. And since then, they've won 5 Ukrainian Premier Leagues, 4 Ukrainian Cups. They've got into the semi-finals of 2 UEFA Europa Leagues, as well as consistently competing in the Champions League, with their budget going like down the whole time. And of course, when there's a full scale, yeah, that's what happens with a full scale invasion. Of course, Tim, like all the Brazilians go. One comes actually, Lucas Taylor, who is a right back. He's no longer there now. Who's a right back who's on loan from PAOK last season, and it sort of shows how the reputation of Shakhtar has grown, especially within Brazilian football to a certain degree. Because I remember asking him before their first their first Champions League game last season at home against Celtic. It's one thing people choosing to stay after war breaks out, like Lassina Traore, the Burkinabe striker, did, for example, who came from Ajax. But you chose to come after war. Well, why did you do that? And he said, well, Champions League, isn't it? No, it's just like he just shrugged as if, what a stupid question. I get to play Champions League for a club that I've seen loads of my compatriots succeed at abroad. So, you know, we don't know what's going to happen in Ukraine in the future. You know, God willing, it will be over and Ukrainian people will be safe and you'll be able to rebuild their country as soon as possible. But if that was possible, like the way that they feel about Brazil, the way that Akhmatov, the president, feels about Brazilian football and feels about Brazilian players, that's not gone away. I think they'll probably pick that up again pretty quickly. But of course, it depends how long they can keep going in the meantime.
Everybody knows, I hope, that the war will end. It will end. Wars end at some point or other, however long it takes. Shakhtar, incredibly, are playing in Poland now. That's their home arena, isn't it? In Poland, as I understand.
No, they were playing Champions League games in Poland last season.
Oh, I apologise.
And they're playing them in Hamburg this season.
In Hamburg. Well,
yeah, which gives them access to another for their temporary European home, their safe European home to go back to the clash.
I knew you were going to do that. I knew it.
Sorry, I had to telegraph it. It gives them the chance to play in front of a new football-mad public, a public that's crazy for football in Hamburg, but hasn't had Champions League in a very long time. In the opening Champions League home match of this season against Porto, a game that I played last night as we were recording, they got 45,000 for that, which is pretty phenomenal, really. When it's not your home game. But of course, this is in stark contrast to the Ukrainian Premier League games, which they play where they're able, when they're able, in front of no fans, because you can't gather people in public in Ukraine at the moment. And with that possibility that if an air raid siren goes off, then you go and like hide in the bomb shelter in the basement of the stadium. So there are only a handful of stadiums that can actually have Ukrainian Premier League matches in, because you need to have a bomb shelter and a large enough one to fit 2 teams and staff and admin people and all that in. So it's just an extraordinary situation, really. And I think the longest game with air raid stoppages they've had so far in Ukrainian Premier League, something like 5 hours, because the game got stopped twice. You have to wait to get the coasters clear, come out, warm up again, restart the game. So yeah, it's just an extraordinary situation.
And by the way, I just got back and I wish I'd never leave you. Where'd you go? But that aside, just on your Clash note, you've often talked, and you do in your book as well, Andy, about identity. I wonder when this, and I mean this with all due respect, because I don't see it as pejorative at all, when they've stopped being the gypsies, if you like, of European football, where do they go? You know, do they go back? If they can go back to Crimea, is arguably not part of
Donetsk.
the. Well, apologies. If they can go back to the east, that may not be possible. But where do they? How do they build up their identity once more from where it was before they were booted out of Donetsk?
Well, before full-scale invasion, they'd kind of begun to do that because they started to. They'd always, since leaving Donetsk in 2014, they'd always lived and trained in Kiev because they were lucky enough to have a president who owned a massive palatial 5-star hotel, which is where they had club offices and debriefs, and the players stayed there and all the rest of it. And when the war breaks out, that is the place that they all gravitate to, while, say, the Brazilians, for example, are waiting for evacuation back to their home country. But as some of the players told me, after a while, like they feel able, the hostility is reduced to a point, and there's greater understanding of who they are and what they're about, just fellow Ukrainians, that they end up sharing the Olimpiski with Dynamo Kiev, going back a few years now. So they're training in Kiev, they're playing in Kiev. And it has a massive impact on the players and their life. There's, you know, far less traveling. You know, it cuts out the fact that they're doing 100 flights a year or whatever. So, you know, they finish the game, they go home to their families, and they're home with their families in 20-25 minutes, which is you know, something we can forget about football, is that all the stuff around it is so important to be able to perform on the pitch, that to have that peace of mind. So the idea of them, when this is all over, ending up back in Kiev, maybe as some sort of intermediate step, I think that is probably something that a lot of people connected with the club could live with in the short term. Obviously, I've lived with much worse. The aim, though, is always to get back to Donetsk. You know, clubs are called after places for a reason, because they belong to that place. Although what I think is interesting is the fact that you could ask, is Shakhtar Donetsk still Shakhtar Donetsk? Are they just Shakhtar now? Because since the full-scale invasion, since they've continued to be Ukraine's representative at this most important of times in the top level of European competition, it's felt for the first time, and especially with all the Brazilians going, actually, and it being a largely young Ukrainian team, you know, it's full of kids, really, that idea that they represent Ukraine for the first time. Whereas before, you know, maybe tried to define themselves as being different. Now they're a bit more the Ukrainian everyman's club. And I think the way that Ukrainians in general feel about Shakhtar is way, way different to when they left Donetsk in 2014, when they had everything, you know, the stadium, the players, the budget, trophies, all of it. So having lost everything, they've won something pretty special, you could argue.
How does that compare to the Ukrainian national team, which I'd have thought were the flag bearers of the Ukrainian cause, politically and otherwise? How does the support for Shakhtar compare to that?
Well, there's massive overlap, really. I suppose the difference is, you know, I suppose when we talk about the national team, Dynamo Kiev for years were the sort of club level flag bearers for Ukraine. And now they've not been capable of doing that for a long time. They're not qualified for European competition. They did terribly in European competition. Last season, they got like 1 point from 6 games in the UEFA Europa League. So they're not in the sort of fettle where they can represent Ukraine, whereas Shakhtar can and have stepped up at the right moment. Now, clearly, what international football can do is different. Is totally different. And people who try to rubbish international football, I don't think really understand the point of what it's all about. It's about that ability of, however big or small your nation is, to say, this is me representing my homeland. And of course, representing your homeland when you're in a period of your life when your right to exist actually is under attack. Every time Ukraine play at the moment, it's so important. So in a way, Shakhtar show the day-to-day of how Ukrainians are keeping going, even if they can do that in the Champions League context. Whereas Ukraine, that the whole raison d'etre of international football, to just have the right to exist, to have the right to be, the Ukrainian national team take that to the nth degree.
Well, I think it's time to have a look at the soundtrack of this UEFA Cup final.
Just one final moment on the. Were you there in the stadium for this game, Andy, in Istanbul?
I was not, and that's because I wasn't on Mircea Lucescu's guest list. He told me he spent about a month's wages on buying tickets for people, because of course he's massively popular in Turkey. He was very popular at Galatasaray, where he succeeded Fatih Terim. Did a great job at Besiktas as well. Instilled his philosophy there, and so he said he had a really decent amount of complimentaries, and a decent amount of complimentaries from the club. And after that, so many. He said too many friends in Istanbul, so many others. So yeah, I think like half the capacity of the crowd in Karakoy was probably Lucescu's pals.
Yeah, it was in May 2009, the match that we're looking at. The charts in May 2009 for this week had, well, some familiar faces in it. Not sure what you made of the charts, Andy. You're something of a DJ, so I'm presuming that you understood that we had at number one, essentially, I Got a Feeling Part 2.
Is that right? I'm not familiar with the chart at the time. Please tell me.
Oh, no. I was being ironic there. Basically, there's it's Black Eyed Peas with Boom Boom Pow, which was a sequel, I think. So I Got a Feeling.
Yeah,
basically,
it's nothing, is it? It's some studio experimentation with studio noises experimentation, along with just the most lame kind of one-upmanship. Hey, I'm 2008, you're 2008. Bo Diddley was doing
thing, man.
Well,
that
yeah, but it's just been done to death. I mean, obviously the Black Eyed Peas have their moments, but this is just nothing. There is nothing there, is there? Which maybe serves as a metaphor for the time.
Yeah, their moments, the Black Eyed Peas moments, were quite a long way before that, I would suggest.
Yeah, I remember them coming into a BBC studio to do an interview with me when it was just the three guys before Fergie joined them, when they were, if you like, an authentic rap group. And they were amazing. They rapped in harmony, if that makes sense. And I thought, wow, these guys, it was their first album, I think, that come out at that point. See the cover of it. I can't remember what label it was on or anything. But then it was for the cognoscenti. So for somebody like myself, it was like I could see what they were doing, and they were very clever, very musical, very talented, but they obviously weren't making the money. So
isn't that the point? The mainstream usually ends up killing everyone.
It does, 100%. Would you agree, Andy?
I suppose. I mean, I'm trying to think. The one that really hit the spot for me, it's got to be Joints and Jam, hasn't it? By Black Eyed Peas. That was the one. And that idea of real invention that you were talking about. That's the one that really sticks in my head.
But funny enough, in this chart, and I will for once agree with Tim, what his usually perspective is that, this chart, oh, for God's sake, what they do.
But there's some big hitters.
Yeah,
Big hitters in this chart.
Like what did you see?
Big names.
Yeah. Lily Allen dominates it.
Yeah, no, I find her interesting. Because at least, and let's remember where this is 2009. Capitalism has essentially ended the previous year. These are dramatic things happening, which isn't reflected in the music at all. But Lily Allen, she's got interesting things to say, hasn't she? I mean, it's. I don't actually like it from a musical point of view, but perhaps because I'm not a country and western fan. But Not Fair is just an absolutely brilliant idea. You take the country and western genre and you write a song about female dissatisfaction sexually with their male partner. It's just a beautifully subversive idea. And there's the other one that she's got in the charts at the time, The Fear, which again, musically, I don't like, but it is a really intelligent takedown of 21st century celebrity culture. So at least she's got something to say. And there are things that always irritate me about Lily Allen, the kind of fake chav persona that some of it came dressed in,
Yeah, but it is fake. Because she's a middle class girl, but her era of middle class girl in that part of West London that she grew up in around Ladbroke Grove, that was kind of their entry point into the street, because interestingly enough, Ladbroke Grove, you understand what I mean. I mean, Ladbroke Grove is such a potpourri of different tribes in one small space, and when Jamaicanese or Anglo-Jamaicanese was the dominant force there, whether you were authentically from the street or not, you did kind of go that direction and speak like that and so on,
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. If you go back to Lily Allen's first album, we were talking about representing where you're from and the right to represent where you're from. Now, in a different way, that's exactly that. You know where she's from when you listen to the music, when you listen to the lyrics, the way she defines herself. It's pretty clear, isn't it?
She's totally idiosyncratic. That great calypso she did about London, I thought was a classic, and she knows what she's doing. She's a clever absorber of all the different types of culture. I'll tell you, if ever there was a product in the charts that represented not just where they're from in terms of city, but where they're from in terms of postcode, it's Lily Allen. I can't knock her for that. Eminem is pretty much there. Tinchy Strider, well, I suppose a poor man's tiny temper,
and it's gone mainstream as well, isn't it? It's just bland.
Is this the hip hop you're talking about, or
well, Tinchy, Tinchy? It's just there's no spark there.
Well, why should there be? If they see Black Eyed Peas going to #1 by putting a little bit of a beat underneath them,
but you've got to live with yourself. When you put your head on your pillow, you think.
Well, funny enough, at number 78, at number how do you sleep? Yeah, but at number 78, we've got Dizzy Rascal coming up big on the underground with Fix Up Look Sharp, but he's just about to go. But he's just about to go disco, isn't he? Isn't he just about to come out with Bonkers and tunes like that, which are kind of less two-step where he came from and more kind of high energy mainstream of the time?
Yeah, and I think it's funny. I think it's this year actually that Dizzy Rascal's doing a 20-year anniversary of Boy in the Corner, which when it came out is one of those records. I suppose I don't strictly want to compare him to Public Enemy or Straight Outta Compton by NWA, but you get a similar feeling of that in the it's really like angular and confrontational, and the first time you hear it, oh thought, what is this?
Yeah, yeah,
Like
yeah.
anything. And in a time before, this is before like Stormzy or Dave or Skepta or any of those UK hip
That's
hop
true.
mega
That is
stars,
true.
really, isn't
Yeah.
it?
It
He
comes.
was someone who totally defined himself, like rather than taking from elsewhere, he just took from his immediate environment and didn't try and dress it up in the way that Tim's talking about.
Yeah, you got to give a big shout out to So Solid, who came before him, though. I mean,
Yeah,
he's riding
yeah,
on their
totally.
coattails very much. But what he did, much more. So Solid were like a bad boy crew, if you like, with women. But what Dizzy did was somehow he managed to capture kids at the schools, because I didn't understand what it was about. And it was the kids at the school down the road that told me, nah, this is what Dizzy's saying, blah, 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 blah. And he managed to capture the zeitgeist amongst certainly.
Because he was one. Because
Yeah,
he
yeah.
basically he did half of that album in his music lesson, didn't he?
He did.
Yeah.
And then he got
All
stabbed.
roads lead back to the Clash, isn't it? As Joe Strummer used to say, it's not for them who don't understand it.
It's true.
Yeah.
It's true. Listen, on that note, let me just wish you well with the book. The book's
Thank
called
you.
We Play On, Shakhtar Donetsk, Fight for Ukraine, Football and Freedom. It's by our third musketeer, Andy Brassell, the top brass. And like I say, it's a proper flipping book. I'm going to have to write one soon.
Why don't you name it after Lionel Jeffries?
He fucking takes the piss, Andy. He takes the fucking piss every single time. I've got a unique name.
You leave that in,
Jeffries.
Tommy. Leave that
Jeffries.
last line in. Leave it in.